Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Between the Lines. Today, our theme is our language, my identity. My special show guest, our special show guest. Hello, Lucian. Good to see you. Our special show guest is Cay Bappe, who is coming to us from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So, Kay is a linguistics major. She is finishing up her master's thesis. And so today I've invited her as a language explorer to talk about her new adventure. Kay, would you introduce yourself and tell us about what you're doing?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. Thank you, Mom, for introducing me and inviting me onto the show to talk about this project. I'll go ahead and share my screen while I'm introducing myself so we all have something to look at. Um, so yeah, I'm a master's student at UNC Chapel Hill. And this thesis project that is still very much in the works, I'm still gathering data as we speak. So if you're interested, you are also welcome to be a part of this project that is very near and dear to my heart. It's about Singapore English, which some of you might know about being a part of this show. And it's about perceptions and identities that go along with Singapore English, as well as many other English dialects around the world. Um, so yeah, that's what we're talking about today. And should I just get into it or yes? Okay, cool. So just a little bit of a roadmap of what I'm going to quickly go through today. We have our introduction and overview of this thesis that I'm doing, and then again, how to participate. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal connections to this work. Then I'll open up for discussion. I'll talk a little bit about the big picture. I'm going to do a little poetry reading since I heard we like that here. And then I have a slide with some recommended reading that's sort of also been a big part of leading me to this project and these ideas. So our introduction. So here are the questions, the big questions that are sort of pushing me through this research is about this idea of native speakerism, which is kind of a hot topic in linguistics right now. You know, it's about this term that we throw around a lot in linguistics is native speaker, and you know, what are the sort of the connotations that come with that? What is detrimental about that term for people worldwide? How does it interact with racism? And you know, what are the impacts of that, you know, on identity of the speakers that we are talking about or maybe excluding with this term? And then how can we sort of deconstruct these systems that are harmful, right? And so with this project, which those would be very ambitious to address in one tiny master's thesis. So I'm trying to address some smaller, but probably still too big questions of what are the global and local perceptions of Singapore English speakers, and what are the linguistic identities of Singapore English speakers? So I just want to plug for how you can participate in this project. I've got two links here, which I'm sure my mom has been spreading around on social media. There's two different surveys, one for Singaporeans and one that's sort of advertised as for Americans because that's who I have my accessibility to, but it's really for anybody who does not identify as a Singapore English speaker or yeah, so for a more broad survey for that. So I'm trying to finish collecting data by April 9th, but we would love to have you participate. Um, okay, author positionality. How did I kind of get here? So this is kind of a deeply personal project for me as I'm learning that research can be, which is, really great because I don't know that I would be able to do research without it being personal. So sort of before I graduated with my bachelor's, that's a long period of time. But I mean, I've always sort of grown up in a multicultural setting. Um, but I've had that sort of background while growing up in predominantly white communities, which has just really been a big part of forming my identity, basically. But yeah, when I wanted to start college, I was really drawn towards the humanities. I've always been interested in English and in teaching and, in relationships and that sort of thing. But as some of us have might all experienced, I felt some pressure to go into something more STEM related. But I really couldn't sacrifice a lot of those things that I wanted. So I was lucky enough to find linguistics really early, and it's given me an opportunity to work in a really interdisciplinary field, which is great. With social sciences and psychology, but also, sort of pattern recognizing and all this stuff. But I love linguistics. Yeah. So I'm really lucky that I got into that. So yeah, towards the end of my college career, I became more interested in having a global community. I was planning to live abroad in Japan to teach English when 2020 hit and we started the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a recent graduate, I was unemployed, I was questioning everything, as we all sort of were. I was, pessimistic and disappointed by a lot of different policies, by like the systemic racism that was becoming harder and harder to ignore, even as somebody who is very privileged and doesn't have to deal with it as much on a day-to-day basis. Feeling really uncertain about the future. Up until this point, I'd felt very sure of where I was sort of going. Like I knew I wanted to do this and then this and then this, and it just like sort of all fell apart, and it became hard to um figure out what came next or how to deal with not knowing. And it was also my first time not being a student, not being an employee, and just being a person. And that has helped me in many ways sort of question the sort of things that we view as hard and fast, and realizing that not everything has to be on a perfect timeline, and not everything has to be cut and dry as we might always want it to be or something. So starting graduate school, I still had all of these sort of confusing and swirling thoughts in my head, and academia wasn't quite as fulfilling as I thought it would be. And I was really questioning, how can I continue with this, continue with school, and continue with research in a way that doesn't feel detached from the real world and the real concerns that I was having as as a person. So that's when I went to the University of Michigan for a summer experience, and I was introduced to native speaker ideology, which is a um, again, kind of a big issue, I think, especially in the linguistics field. And it had some connections to like what I sort of recognize as racism. So before I like did that, I was thinking about Singapore English a lot and thinking about how Singapore English has always been, sort of subordinated to other English dialects, such as British English or American English or even Australian English or whatever. And I'm like, why is that? And, something in the back of my head thinks that has to do with race. So hearing like professors and stuff like that talk about that and, acknowledge that made me feel like maybe there is a path forward in this field. So that's sort of what's gotten me into this project. So more, I mean, I have a familial connection to Singapore English, right? So even though I've grown up as an American English speaker, very much immersed in American culture, I am blessed to have had so many Singaporeans in my life, thanks to my mom and to my family. And I think that this has been a really great a really part of my background that I'm very proud of. And so it's led me to, this is where sort of the beginning of all of my questions about these big topics. So that's why we are addressing it in this thesis. Yeah. And yeah, the other part of this is, this identity as a student, as an academic, as a researcher or whatever, is I don't believe that, academia should belong to academics. Like, I feel like that's very isolating. It's a bit, uh, I don't know, arrogant or whatever. So, I mean, I think it's important for there to be, outreach to expand the research community to include real people, and that research questions and findings should be relevant to those real people. I think that um, even as a researcher, even as somebody who's read so much about, Singapore English, I have so much to learn from the people that I'm gathering data from. So that's sort of also where I'm coming from with this sort of project. All right, so yeah, our prompt today, I came up with Our Language, My Identity. It was super hard to come up with a prompt, but I kind of like this one. It's simple. I like sort of the pronoun game of, it could be my language, our identity, but it sort of has this essence of community, but also there's something that's deeply personal, which sort of encaptures where I am in my life right now, like a desire for community, a global community, a personal community, while also sort of simultaneously developing that personal part, your identity, which I think those go very hand in hand. Um, so I wrote this thing very quickly. It was actually initially trying to come up with a prompt, but I came up with my language is who I am, how I'm heard, how I'm lost. Yeah. I don't know how the what how am I doing on time? Is it going okay? Yeah. Um, thought I had another poem. Yeah, this is by David Morton. I was Googling around for poems, and this one sort of also resonated with me. So I'll go ahead and read that. Um, Look now with what a brave despair, with what a stoical repose the rose deploys upon the air, all that it means to be a rose. The petals break and with no sound, and falter, falling in no wind, and take their splendor to the ground, and leave a brightened air, a thinned and torn anomaly to stand, as autumn comes where summer came. Look, now, across the golden land, but not at this, which has no name. So yeah, there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings going on here. I really appreciate you guys letting me come into this space. It's not a space that I'm usually in as an academic, and it's very cool to be here. I think we'll now open up for responses. Thanks for listening.
Community, Cay Bappe. What thoughts do
Such
you
a
have?
lovely, thoughtful piece.
Thank you.
Yes, I completed doing the survey questions just yesterday.
Yeah.
And having thought about it, I probably got them all back to front and misidentified everybody. Later, do you think this person is fluent in English, or do you think they are well educated, or they went to university? It was, I mean, it was interesting, that idea whether you were picking up on, whether they sounded educated, as to also the way they put together their sentences, their syntax. And obviously, like listening to people speaking, when we all speak, we speak in a very different way to the way that we write, where we actually have more control over the grammar and the form of language. And you think about, well, what would indicate to you, how would you pick up sort of clues about someone's background? It's not just from the way they speak, but the way that they put the words together, whether they sound fluent, or depending on how complicated or complex the ideas are that they're trying to present. So it was interesting. I must admit, I felt relieved when I finished it, I got it. It was, yeah, just come to focus and listen. It was good.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's a lot of different layers to sort of doing a very quick analysis, because I believe there are 6-second clips that you're listening to. And yeah, there's a lot of, it's interesting how people will try very, very hard to get some sort of clues towards how can I answer these sort of questions. And I think like it's you can glean very little, I think, from 6 seconds, which is sort of the point, right? Is to see, you know, what sort of assumptions are made based off of a very short clip. And I think a lot of people come away from the survey feeling very uncertain and kind of embarrassed about what their responses might be. And I think that's, you know, because I think that's a good feeling to have, because you shouldn't feel very confident about assumptions that you make about a person from the 6 seconds that you hear them. So I think that's it's an interesting and very cool pattern to see people take away from that.
It's wonderful to see you working on a very critical and significant area of human learning and human survival for your PhD. See, I've myself been a student of linguistics a long time ago. When I began my undergrad as a student of linguistics, I was caught between two phenomena. One was the theory of the Babel, the Tower of Babel, where language is supposed to have made people move away and not come together. Because the gods that be were very scared that man may impose his will on them if they were united with one language. And then I was confronted again with that heavy tome called Daniel Jones and the standardized pronunciation of English. Now, how do you handle these two phenomena as a student of linguistics? And then you come into the rarefied zone of contrastive linguistics and social linguistics. And then you realize that there isn't just one view that would suffice an understanding of any linguistic theory. There isn't a parable of language really that will serve the humankind. And it is at that point that you emerge into what one recognizes as idiolect. The idiolect is perhaps what helps mankind to survive, not the dialect, not the language. It is the idiolect that will save the future of mankind, I guess. Nothing else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you, could you give me a brief definition of what you mean by idiolect? Just so
where language becomes distinguishable between individuals,
okay.
Where each tongue has a different way of uttering a sound, a phoneme.
Yes.
Thank you.
I am a representative of Singapore English. When Cay asked me to contact some of my friends and ask if they would do the survey, I knew that I could just kind of lean on my relationships with some of them and say, do me a favor, participate. It would mean a lot to me and my granddaughter. And some did. But what really surprised me was not only did most of them say yes, but some came back and say, may we have your permission to copy this link to our friends?
Wow.
That tells me that they found the survey fun they also like the idea that Singapore English might get better accepted around the world through studies and exercises such as what you are doing, Kay. So what turned out to be okay, like anything to help my granddaughter has become a bigger thing than that. So I'm very pleased that my friends and their friends are responding this way to support your need to get data.
This was add as well, something I forgot to mention. So I've been used as a Cambridge International English examiner to reading or deciphering Singaporean English as in its written form. And it's very good. It's very, they're very fluent, very good, better than a lot of kind of native English speakers. But it's the first time I'd actually, well, apart from people on here, that encountered a different range of Singaporean voices or accents. And I guess that if you're going on to university and English is like the kind of lingua franca, you're actually, your accent is probably going to be modified a bit because perhaps a different audience, an external audience, to perhaps your normal sort of domestic or family or your local audience. But the other thing too, because that reading some of the pieces, you get the idea, the impression very much about how many of these students, young people, are growing up in a multilingual background. Some of them, English is, it's meant, I'm meant to be marking it as English as a first language. But for some of them, it's the second language in practice. And even then, for some, it's maybe even the third language. So maybe their grandparents speak not just Chinese, but a dialect of Chinese. Not and then maybe they're also speaking Singaporean English or Singlish. So I imagine their linguistic abilities must be really well honed. It's like, when people grow up speaking two languages. So if you have Asian families here in England, they're speaking whatever it is, Hindi or Mawadi or Indian dialect at home, and then they're speaking English at school and for their formal lessons. And I think it's quite well researched fact that if you're speaking more than one language from an early age, it makes you much more adept at learning other languages when you're growing up or when you grow up, because your mind has already assimilated to this kind of mental change from one mode to another, from one kind of grammar and set of vocabulary and syntax to another one. So in some ways, you're kind of growing up with a bigger advantage in some ways than people who are only growing up with their mother tongue, with their native language. I'm not sure if that comes across in any of your research. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting as, an American English monolingual speaker and living in America and doing a lot of research on English and English speakers. We sort of get this mindset where we're thinking about monolingual as the norm, and then multilingual speakers having all of these advantages cognitively or maybe socially and stuff like that, with all of the different contexts in which they would use it. But I mean, a lot of researchers are sort of bringing to the forefront the sort of paradigm switch that, monolinguals are not really the norm when you consider the entire world. The vast majority of speakers are some sort of multilinguals. But So yeah, I think that's very interesting because I mean, as linguists, as scientists, we like to have, you know, our perfect little control baseline where we have one person who's had one language immersed in their mind since they were a baby, and that allows them to sort of become this perfect speaker of that language, versus like, even though you might have cognitive benefits from having multiple languages and it might help you learn languages later on, definitely. In linguistics, we measure very, very closely, and we can find that that there usually is one language out of, even if they learn them both simultaneously, there's usually one that's dominant and one that's, you know, subordinate or whatever. And I find that these are, well, they're sort of interesting in the question of like, how do we learn language? What exactly is language as sort of a mechanism? I find that sort of elevating those questions and those observations has often had, you know, detriments in the more social arenas of sort of seeing this language that you have as subordinate or in a deficit, or that multilingual speakers will automatically have some sort of deficit when it comes to their linguistic abilities in that way. So I think it's very interesting to hear, you know, other monolingual English speakers sort of admire multilinguals, because I certainly would consider myself in that group as well. And it sort of reminds me of this issue that is, you know, maybe somewhat isolated to just even the linguistics community, and maybe trickling down into some, you know, English education areas as well. But yeah, it's a very cool area thinking about. Thanks.
Diane?
Well, thank you so much, Kay. I really appreciate the topic. It's a wonderful prompt. I'll deal with your mother later. I heard her comments earlier. I just wanted you to know that it is a wonderful topic. My undergrad is in medical anthropology, and in my own family, most of the time, what people are told is that you learn the language of the colonizer. So you can have multiple languages already off the bat before you learn or even are allowed to recall your native language, because you want to be sure that as you aspire to go on for education in school and everything else, that those opportunities are going to be in the language of the colonizer. So, for example, one of the languages that my family spoke is now extinct. But there's a group of people who are trying to bring that language back. And so it's very difficult. I'm helping them bring that language back, but there's an offshoot of that language that I've kind of learned. But it's not really the language that my family spoke. But it's interesting how English, depending on how you pronounce English and where you are, whether it's in America or England or anywhere else, that it's obvious that your accent gives you away. And if you don't sound exactly like the way English, I'll use as an example, is spoken, you are going to be ostracized, because it's already, you're different. You're different than, because you don't speak it exactly the way they speak it on this mainland, not somewhere else. So it is interesting. I have, she said, now I have an aunt who she would speak in her dialect, her idiolect English amongst us. But when she was at work, she spoke the Queen's English, because that was considered the way to speak. And I had a friend of mine who worked in a setting where she's not from here, and she learned the Queen's English, and she was correcting her supervisor's work. And her supervisor said, "What are you doing? That's not," she said, "Well, she was correcting it according to the British standard of English, not the American standard of English." So she didn't realize she was doing anything wrong And she said, well, you Americans bastardized English. You don't know English. You were a colony. This is how you do English. So I just use that as an example of someone, you know, taking umbrage in what Americans call English, and maybe in England that's not what you would consider English. So I think it's a great prompt. For myself, it is a lot of personal research. I've been able to go to archival information, look at, you know, as people travel from land to land and everything else. But it's interesting how other languages impact on the language, how you find some words that are similar but not quite, but they seem the same, are written the same, sound the same, but might mean something completely different. So I think it's a wonderful project. I think that you'll do very well. There's a lot of it that is transferable internationally, okay? Because while dance and music are languages that we understand, right? Because of emotion, because of feeling. As poets, we like to think we are wordsmiths. We are. We have mastery of language. And I'll just say this last thing. Yesterday, the University of Amherst had a wonderful conversation with poets. And there might be a video, a taping of it. It was 90 minutes, University of Amherst. And one of the poets is a translator, and she said she learns a great deal about language because she translates it. Now, she's not necessarily completely fluent in the language, so she uses a team of people who really know the language. And she said they discuss what's the right word, what's the right phrase. I want to make sure when I translate this poet's work that I get it right. So it's a team approach. And even in my own research with my own search for the extinct language, that my great aunt was one of the last people listed to speak it. When I met her, I was just a child. She spoke to me in English because she knew that's what Diane knew. Diane knows English. That's what Diane is being raised in. And it's unfortunate that I didn't get her to speak the language, but I didn't know any better. I was a kid. Now I have to go back, and it's my responsibility, I think, to go find the language the way my grandmother used a few words, but then she always reverted back to English because we live here on the mainland, you know, and that's what I have to know how to use. So thank you for the prompt. Great prompt.
Thank you. That was lovely. Yeah, I'm hearing so much about, the prompt exactly that is being evoked there. And language is so big and so personal to us at the same time. You know, it's how we connect, it's how we build relationships and form communities. And, you know, in that same way, it creates judgments, right? So, and we have these sort of separations of communities as well. Like I am an American English speaker, you know, I hail from the Midwest, I'm a Midwest English speaker, and that sort of separates me from, you know, East Coast English. And like that diversity is wonderful and beautiful, but it also leads to, you know, prejudices and, you know, that sort of like and like with that personal element of like, this is part of my identity, then that must mean other people are doing this thing that is still my language, they're doing it wrong. And so like it's such a big thing, language, you know, it has great powers, and then it also has things that lead to conflict and within ourselves and within our communities and as a world. So thank you. Yeah.
Neil.
Thanks, Kay. And I must confess, I haven't done the survey, but I will. And thank you for the prompt and very interesting topic. So a bit of background and context might help. Kemlyn knows this, and I think some others as well. So I come from a family of linguists, but I speak, dream, sleep, whatever, only in one language, which is the language you currently hear me speaking in. Which is a huge shame. So both my parents were PhDs from Cornell University, and I spent part of my life as a campus brat in Ithaca, New York. So anyway, I grew up with this at the dinner table. So it's been a long time since I've heard the terminology. I ran 100 miles from it and took up mathematics, statistics, and banking. So anyway, that's a different story. But it's interesting as I reacquaint myself with this. In the last 3 years, I've kind of returned to things with literature. But what you say makes a whole lot of sense. But if I gave you just the Indian context, it kind of, and I'll come back to it during the poetry, hopefully as a response. But as Ravi will also attest to, being a linguist and a PhD himself, I mean, there's something like 22 languages in India, and I know none of them, although English is an official language in India. And there's something like 398 dialects at the last count. So it's interesting listening to the conversation around a handful of dialects and languages. So, you know, you're having to wrestle with that. Although I never embraced any of them in the sense that I developed my own shorthand for, do I know a language? So if you ask me, do I know a language? Well, yeah, I can understand and speak a bit of Arabic. Some folks on this Zoom call are trying to teach me Singlish, or attempted to, and I've probably given up in frustration, but and so on and so forth. But my acid test is, have you independently gone to a bookstore and picked up the literature of the language and read it? And unless you can do that, and for me once was, I actually had to try and give a talk on banking, which was my expertise, in Hindi. And I rang up my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, how do you say checking account?" And you know, his response was not very polite. But anyway, so back to what Diane said in terms of languages that are disappearing, but always kind of have a root angle to it. Sanskrit is something that I kind of was influenced with. And I don't know how much of that will ever come into your ambit of research, Kay, but I hope it does, because it does inform a huge amount of the vocabulary of many, many languages, as I understand it. What else did I want to say? There are a couple of other points I had. Sorry. Yeah. The other thing I've noticed is that as people get old, and even if they've, so my dad's family migrated from a part of undivided India into India and had to adapt. They had to kind of give up the language, the local language they were speaking for half their lives. It's really interesting that grandparents, as they got older, they reverted to the language they had grown up with, although for all intents and purposes, they had abandoned it. So I just leave that point out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, no, a lot of times when I sort of bring up this big topic of world Englishes and then my small portion of Singapore English, people love to also ask about Indian English, which is, you know, sort of where a lot of people think of, I mean, this phenomenon is also found where there is, you know, so much language contact in so many different languages in a small, I mean, in densely packed into an area, right? Then sort of English, because of colonial reasons, has sort of risen as this lingua franca, and then a large populace of people are now learning it from a very young age, even before school, right? And so, yeah, I think about Indian English a lot when at the same time, there's a lot of parallel research that is very relevant to each other. And it's very cool to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just give you one example and leave it at that. There's a word called choke, which I guess you know in Singlish. It's kind of reserving a seat at a hawker center or food court. And if you pick up any book on Singlish, it'll tell you that that word came into the language Singlish from English, meaning to chop. And the funny thing is, it actually has come from Hindi or Arabic, because the word chop actually means mark. So it's curious how you have these different things. Yeah.
That's very cool. It's a cool example. Thank you. Yeah.
I would like to hear from Justin or Soy, because they are non-family members who are from Singapore.
Their family.
That's true. Family of choice. but not blood family. So I would say a little bit less bias lah, but not true because you guys are here all the time, so you guys are biased.
Easy.
So I guess I shall go first. Okay. Well, growing up, I used to speak various Chinese dialects, and I've not spoken Chinese dialects for a while, but I can still understand it. And if I need to go back to them, I can. And I also picked up English more like a first language at school. So Chinese for me was a second language, and we only learned Mandarin in school, no dialects. Somehow when writing poetry, I have so much difficulty with meter. I just cannot get the meter right, and I end up counting syllables because actually the Chinese language, it's like one word is usually one syllable. So I realized that, when I'm writing poetry, that's what keeps me going. I mean, as in like it gives me some structure, and I really cannot do sonnets like how Ian does it. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's a lot of counting, and I hate math. I mean, you all know that. So it's just this very, very strange combination of not wanting to count and yet I count. And yet, the language, I cannot write anything in Chinese beyond like one sentence. So yeah, and okay, Chinese characters are also very difficult to read. And like one of my kids said, they seem to be jumping around on the page. Whereas English and some of the other languages which employ the alphabet system, right, is a lot easier to read. So yeah, so I just find that it's very, very difficult to read Chinese. But I mean, I studied Spanish a little bit, and then I realized that it's also because the convent where I went to for school, the nuns came from Italy. So I was kind of like exposed to that kind of nuances or that kind of accent, like yeah. So I guess, it's always been somewhere at the back of my mind. And even before I studied Spanish, when we went to Spain, there was this small little museum, and the guide could speak English, but she said she's not supposed to guide in English. And I could pick up what she was saying. And my husband was very shocked. He said, "How could you even ask her a question when I didn't even know what she was talking about?" I mean, he didn't know what she was talking about. But because I could kind of catch a little bit of what she was saying, I could ask a question based on what she was saying in Spanish. So it's not that I am very good at languages or anything, but I think it's the exposure as well. Yeah, so it just comes back to you when, like if I go to Hong Kong, probably the Cantonese will come back a little bit more. Yeah, so it's also whether you're in that place or not to use that language. I think we should all just continue using whatever languages we know. The other thing about Singapore is that we are quite ashamed of Singlish, generally speaking. So, people say that, like what Kay said, sometimes you think that people who can speak different languages or different things, different dialects, they have a very good thing going there. But we actually feel quite embarrassed about the level of English that we speak. So yeah, so sometimes we because we are fearful that people don't understand English. So that's the other part of being Singaporean as well and speaking Singlish. So there's always the other point of view. So I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there that I would love to touch on everything that you said. The first thing I will talk about is recently I listened to a talk by someone who also sort of works in this field, and the sort of idea of how we are into like today's world is that there's nobody who is really only come into contact with one language. Like even I've talked about, you know, monolingual American English speakers and how many of us we are we often talk about how foreign language education in the US is not very good. But at the same time, there have been studies done where, you know, American English people who claim that they know no other languages and they only know English, like are statistically better in recognizing the meanings of Spanish words or French words or German words. Just because of, I mean, we've all been sort of exposed to different levels of things. And how can we, where do we draw the line in knowing absolutely nothing about other languages versus knowing all of a language? It's very messy, and we like to think that it's not, but it is. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And then I also wanted to, the being sort of ashamed or embarrassed about Singlish or your level of English, I think is something that's sort of passed down from ideologies of people in power or people in government. Sort of, it's their prerogative to want to elevate certain dialects of English over others, which, as you sort of mentioned, the desire to be understood is a very good and a very reasonable and valid motivation for that. And so it's hard to have that motivation for wanting to be understood, wanting to have a more international dialect, while also preserving your own identity and your own pride in where you come from. It's a difficult balance to strike, especially for a government, right? So I think there are difficulties there. Yeah, there's a lot more things I'm thinking about, but I'll stop there. I think that's great. Thank you.
All right, last call for initial response to the presentation that Cay gave us. I'm enjoying the dialogue. I feel like we could spend a whole weekend talking about this.
No one brought up like the our grandfather Lee Kuan Yew, who came out with the like bilingual language policies. He wanted Singapore to become like a hub between of trading between China and the US, like a sort of like middle trading port things. So he implemented the bilingual policies, but now all our subjects are being taught in English basically, and there's only one Chinese as a subject. So like I gave tuition before, and well, when I thought some of my the students, they basically gave up on Chinese, and they said, okay, I'm just gonna like let the Chinese F9, and F9 is the worst grade possible, and like focus on the other subjects. So I thought it was a pity because like learning, like someone said previously, learning a language early in life, is it Frozen? uh, Learning a language early in life lets you like be more prehensile with it. Yeah. So also my parents were like a hodgepodge. Like my dad was Hokkien and my mom was Cantonese. So like I can basically speak both dialects quite fluently from young. And also they sent me like Soy, they sent me to this speech and drama class where I learned like dramatic techniques from nuns basically. Like sisters, nuns, yeah. So I thought that gave me a slight edge over others, but also got me a bit discriminated from the Singlish crowd. Yeah. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Listening to your stories, it reminds me of everything I've heard from my mom, right? And I'm sure she can talk about that as well. But I mean, sort of this sort of background, this childhood of hearing these Chinese dialects that with the bilingual policies, which, you know, are in somewhat good faith, right, in wanting to have this again, like, so I've been talking about English, right, but we can also talk about the language ideologies of Mandarin Chinese over all the Chinese dialects, right, and how Mandarin is supposedly so useful for, you know, international connections with this huge superpower right next door, China. But it's and so, like, yeah, I think in many ways learning Mandarin Chinese is super beneficial. It's a very beautiful language. It's very cool. And I think it's great. But also, you know, there's sort of this, you know, a resentment of no longer having like your actual family's language, your actual mother tongue, right? And I remember, you know, listening to mom talk about Hokkien and Teochew and how she hated learning Mandarin in school, and yet that's what she could teach me, you know. So I grew up, you know, speaking English, and then every few years or so we would go into do our little Chinese lessons, and I would learn some Mandarin, and that made me feel connected to my heritage in some sort of disconnected way. And then when I went to university, I had Mandarin Chinese classes accessible to me, and I ended up getting a minor in Mandarin Chinese. And I thought, oh, wow, I get to be so connected to my heritage and be connected to Singapore. And I remember telling my Chinese teacher that I was Chinese, because I mean, I was ethnically Chinese, right? But as I continued through that sort of education, I realized that I wasn't like other people who were Chinese or whatever. And it's been sort of difficult, like having these pieces of Mandarin in my mind and sort of recognizing that that's not truly what, if I had heritage languages, such as these Chinese dialects, it doesn't really reflect that as well as I thought. And knowing English and having grown up, I mean, like, even with those Chinese dialects, what I heard most when I visited Singapore is still Singapore English and Singlish. And so wanting to dive into those more is like, why can't that be recognized as a heritage language, basically, is sort of what my personal thoughts have been too. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Lucian?
Also, if I might add just one more line, if all the NS commands are given in basically in Malay, so like all the Singaporean males basically know like certain, like maybe a dozen phrases in Malay, like cepat jalan, ke kiri kanan, yeah, turn left, turn right, march, yeah. So that's also some factor for thought when you're writing your thesis. You might want to think about that. Like why? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yeah, the language contact, so cool. Yeah, we talk about, I've had to focus on Singapore English, which by, you know, professional or academic standards is sort of, you know, what Singapore English is when speaking to an international audience, when sort of removing these sort of borrowed words. But I mean, it removes an essential part of, I think, the dialect, as well as all of the different, you know, like the Malay words, the Chinese dialects, Hokkien, Tamil, or whatever. Yeah, it's all very mixed. Yeah, it's just very cool.
Lucian, do you have a comment for Cay?
I think my summative comment is I spent half my life shedding my Singaporean accent, because when I speak like this, nobody wants to talk to me because it's too much work. They don't understand. They ask me whether I'm speaking English, and then they look down on me and see me small. So the irony is, when I transition into this, I have no accent. I have no cultural identity. I forget who I am, and then I miss who I am. So with that, I'm going to transition with my response in video and also a transitional piece while you work on your poetry.
Speaker is a trainee teacher at the National Institute of Education, where she's learning to be a native English speaker. Yes, native English speaker. It's kind of funny to hear that, because the last time we saw her was actually in a club in New York's East Village, and she was doing all kinds of voices and characters something you usually see only in a film involving demonic possession. But she's definitely more angel than devil, as she also works with Migrant Voices. It's a registered non-profit organization that seeks to platform the voices of migrant workers to the arts. We are very, very proud to welcome Ms. Ruby Pan.
When I was in college in America, I worked really hard on acquiring an American accent because I wanted to act in American plays. After some time though, performance translated into real life, and I ended up talking like this most of the time. In the middle of freshman year, my roommate said to me, okay, that was not supposed to happen. Anyway, in the middle of freshman year, my roommate said to me, we forget you're not American sometimes. And I couldn't figure out if that was a cause for celebration or worry. Whenever I met someone new, they'd ask, where are you from? California? And I'd say, no, I'm from Singapore. And they'd go, wow, really? You have no accent. And I'd say, no, I have an American accent. It took me a year to pick it up and iron out the kinks. Then they looked a little disconcerted, like I was making fun of them or something. And I'd explain, well, we get a lot of American TV in Singapore, so I've had a lot of time to practice. I mean, I've been listening to you speak since I was a kid. And now whenever I miss America, now that I'm all graduated and back in Singapore, I tune into Perfect 10, 98.7 FM, the hit station of the nation, so I can hear this DJ speak in their lovely American accents while spinning hip-hop 24/7, even though gangsters and pimps and hoes and life in the hood barely exist in our imagination. What still surprises me, though, is turning on the news and hearing a voice informing me that peace talks in the Middle East have reached a bottleneck because of a 3-car pileup along the PIE. Blame it on my American education, but I still have trouble deciphering the intense English accents and sometimes bizarre intonation of our newscasters. Which led me to wonder, why is it that the news has to be reported in fake BBC while songs are dedicated in fake American? Isn't American accent more entertaining? Does a British accent sound more authoritative to post-colonial Singapore years? Would I be taken less seriously if I spoke with an American accent? And why is it that so many English language teachers in this country seem to speak some strange variety of Steve upper lip? All that I've gathered since coming home about a month and a half ago is that I'm supposed to speak standard English like a native speaker. But nobody specified. Native to where? Thanks to 12 years of education in elite Singapore schools, I do have the ability to speak what is known as echolectal Singaporean English. According to Wikipedia, this is the highest class form of speech used by the well-educated in formal situations. Echolectal Singaporean English is roughly the same as British English, with the exception of some pronunciation differences that occur due to the influence of Singlish pronunciation. At the other end of the spectrum, there is Baselectal Singlish, which is defined as the colloquial speech used by almost everyone, educated or not, in informal settings, and is the speech usually referred to as Singlish. But actually, I think that's not true. A lot of those Singaporeans who speak very good English, right? A lot of them cannot speak. more English than others.
I'm working on my Kepo auntie accent because if Clive Osman got Queen's Speech, I also want Queen Auntie.
Don't play.
Thank you, Lucian. Do you have a piece for us?
That was it.
Oh, that's all. That's all you have to say.
She said it better than I could.
In what accent?
Native to what country?
Yeah. So I can see Kay smiling
That was
because
pretty comprehensive.
now, Ian, this answers why I speak the way I do.
I had no idea what you were talking about.
Okay, I was making reference to the fact that remember I told you when you said you wish you could hear in one space all the many different Englishes of the world. This is why I wanted to invite you to this community.
Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. I'm full of people who study language, but I mean it's not a very diverse program here at North Carolina. So it's a very much a privilege to and an honor to be in a space like this where we are all communicating and all sharing and maintaining a diverse space still. It's very cool.
So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to pull the mommy privilege card. So I will tell you a story about Kay. I tried to expose all three of my children to different languages. Thank you, baby Einstein. Because I was of the helicopter tiger mom belief that there is an opportunity to be had if they were exposed to different sounds and languages at an early age. Besides baby Einstein, I also tried to teach Kay and Dot and Dietrich Mandarin, Spanish, and I was really distressed, especially with Kay, because she was my number one. She's supposed to be my prodigy. Kay, why don't you speak and practice Spanish with me? And she would. This is about 2-year-old Kay, all right? All right, come on, Kay, speak Spanish. Habla español conmigo, por favor. So I would speak to her, and she would just always answer me in English. Until one day, we were at the immigration. I was still working on my PR, so we were at the immigration building, and there was a little boy playing, and Kay was speaking to him in English, and he would not respond. Then out came the Spanish. And they had a grand old time. Part of the conversation today was the fact that we speak because there's necessity to communicate to another human being. When I'm in other countries and served as a missionary, oftentimes there were many people who would, in other circumstances, never hang out with me. But because there were so few of us who could communicate to each other, we suddenly found ourselves banding together, and we were kakinang, which is one of us. But as soon as there was a critical mass of any one language group, I started to observe the separation or the distancing, to say, I want to form another subgroup and I'm going to distance myself. And it made me sad because I realized that how natural human tendencies are to distance ourselves when we find another smaller subcommunity. Why can we not intentionally push back the other way? Which is why I'm so proud and grateful for each one of you for reminding me week after week. We live in a big world, a beautiful one. And each of you come to the space with that commitment to see one another, choosing that your kakinang or your community is a larger one. So I applaud you. What, Lucian? You give me the look.
Well said.
Oh, I thought like, wow, so cheesy. Okay. How would you like, who would like to go first? Ian, and then Rick.
Okay, right. Well, I was quite intrigued by this prompt. In fact, I wrote not one poem, but actually two, but I'm only going to read one. This one's called Tainted by Default. And I may speak in tongues shaped by the life experience of myriad generations, stretching back like a river flowing from a distant source, negotiating the shoals and cataracts, inflecting its meandering course. And though at times my tongue, it may twist and act awry and deceitful, the colour of my green eyes remains clear, unalterably truthful to what they have seen. We may alter our behaviours according to circumstance, but the encoded pattern that wraps its coils around each individual cell is faithfully fixed and constant. This bloodline, unbroken through the ages, is my true inheritance, and each word that I have ever spoken carries the imprinted accent that follows me more resolutely even than my shadow, which, let's face it, is a fickle fellow that deserts my side more often than not when the light fails to shine on me. But although my name carries the weight of a long lineage, it tells only half the tale, following a patrilineal line of sight. The other half remains steadfastly hidden below the surface of my adopted skin. This female side that's nurtured me, suckled me, a helpless babe, at the mother's teat. And even though this blood running through my very veins may be tainted by default, it is my lot, my true identity, only colored by a common language that I imbibed, fashioned me in some ways from those earliest far-off days, lying in my cot. And I don't mean to deny my heritage, though it tethers me to a heavy and immovable rock, just as my mother tongue clings to me tenaciously. It has traveled along many broken tributaries to draw the outline that I now inhabit, for better or worse, however gracious or ungraciously. Thanks.
Cay, during the segment, please feel free to respond as well.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I'm afraid I'm gonna cry at all of these. I don't know what response is typically warranted as beautiful. I don't like, yeah, it makes me think about, there's a lot of things I haven't shared about the personal things that I feel when it comes to, my language, like, and it being English, there's so much that's wrapped up with your core being, and simultaneously part of me feels shame at only being able to know this language, or only knowing this language that's been a part of so many conflicts and things that I would not want to associate myself with, and yet it is me, right? And yeah, I think that I don't feel worthy to respond, to be honest. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's perfect. No, I thought when I was writing, I was thinking. I was rereading Arthur Rimbaud's *Season in Hell*, and the first chapter of that, the first section, is called "Tainted Blood." And I just thought, oh yeah, and then I just adapted that to "Tainted by Default," which in a way, it's kind of like putting a bit of a, I don't know, a down slant, but it's where sometimes we feel that, you know, we can't help it. Where we are, where we're from, the accent we speak in is something which it's actually sometimes it's like it's written in the genes in your inheritance. But at the same time, there's a certain thing that is true about you. And when I said about the difference between like the linguistic side and that physical. So I took the idea of my eyes, because I got green eyes, which I think sort of genetically establishes me. My father was from Scotch background, so I'm kind of part Celtic. And the same way that someone has brown eyes or blue eyes, that is part of you. You can't deny that. You can see it. Whereas your language is more sort of malleable. Than, from where you come from, your family. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing in that sense. You can be gracious or ungracious in any language.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a beautiful connection. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyway, I'm glad you appreciated it.
Richard Spizak and then Diane Murray Ward.
Thank you, Kay. I want to congratulate you on studying something that's so close to your heart. I was taking courses in anthropology, and it struck me to do a study on what people use for power words. So I went around and asked 100 people what their favorite swear word was. And it shocked me that almost, I would say 75% of them didn't want to say it. And I said, but these are the words that you turn to out of frustration, out of joy, out of passion. What is that word? And they just absolutely, although they would shout it, right? They would whisper it, they would scream it, but they didn't want to say it. They didn't want to be on the record. So I thank you for this charming prompt. I apologize, but I will get to your quiz. Let me offer you this. Just as I heard about your prompt, I had just written a poem exactly about the problems of communication. So let me share this, and it's in the most bizarre situation. I have done a lot of marketing. So, and marketing is all about capturing one idea and then presenting it in the most palatable way. So here we go. This is called The Insurance Meeting. I was attending a meeting on insurance, which required no little endurance. The conversation threw me when the insurance dude who knew me tossed me a salad of words that made me doubt what I'd heard. Was it that absurd? What was important? Because I was to sell it, the very first clause. So I needed to learn how I might tell it, so then I could loudly bell it. I was the marketing guy at the table. In the wordsmithery, I am usually more than able to sell what the suits, in their confusion, force whatever on the public that amuses them. And if I understood, I might make it good, or at least make it easier to sell whatever strawberry flavored hell they got. So usually I get it, though I wish I could forget it, which I explain after I grind it with my brain to spell it plain, but this one lost me complete. Read. This was custom talk straight from the insurance shop, meant by design to be opaque, lest there not be some mistake they could use to avoid to pay, as Freud would say, more than a little delay. Now, in high-powered meetings like this, we must foster the illusion that there is no confusion. Well, by all means, let's just sign and get out of here. No new confusion, no blue contusions, nevermore. But I gotta sell it, so I asked him to spell it. What did he mean when he used the word breakage? What was the lakeage? Help me across this dangerous choppy waters of this lakeage. The insurance exec smiled as he shuffled his papers that were piled. It works out somehow like this. For insurance to exist, the plan is never pay. Never pay by night, never pay by day. But my friends aloud, this they never say. They must betray our company's investors by paying? If we must betray our company's investors by paying, there's no more use than anything than delaying. We call it breakage, lest there be some mistakage, because we don't pay. We don't pay. That's the breakage. That's all he would say.
That was charming. That was lovely. What a juxtaposition between our first two. That's lovely. Yeah. Oh, wow. That sounded so good. You make such a frustrating situation sound so good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Diane.
Okay, so Kay, I just want you to know, along with language, you know, you mentioned a little bit about regionalism. I was having something translated into Spanish, which is one of the most difficult languages when it comes to grammar, because if you give a Colombian something that's translating Spanish, and a Puerto Rican is going to say, oh, no, you can't say that. That's not how you say this. And so anyway, I had something translated into Spanish, and I had someone here in New York review it, and they said, I can tell you, the person that did this is from California with Mexican parents, and they were raised in Tucson. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, let me find out. I talked to the translator. Sure enough, that's exactly her background. There were certain words that she used that we would not use here on the East Coast of the United States, because certain people would take it a different way. So regionalism. The other thing, look at whether or not you're talking about a matriarchal or patriarchal society. It makes a big difference. And I'm reminded of that by Ian's piece. Matriarchal versus patriarchal, there's going to be a different weight on each one. And of course, race. I know for myself, since I sound very American, if you don't see me, you might think I look differently. But then when you see me, it's not always what they expect, because I don't sound, I guess, the way I look. So it sometimes has thrown people off, because that's not who they expect to see getting off the plane. So it's happened to me more than once. Now my picture's out there, so it's like, okay, you know what she looks like. So anyway, I wrote a piece a while ago called Inheritance, and I purposely did not use language in it. This is what I used. Inheritance. I developed a jawline, drooping jowl coming clear. I inherited full breasts that don't topple me over. I inherited a hairline, not the blonding. I inherited body types from both sides. I inherited small, delicately arched feet. I inherited bicolor eyes, seen only close up. I inherited tenacity, politics, and sides differing. I inherited strong calved legs from mountains climbed in warm and wintry climes. I inherited a cornucopia of genes, professions, sensibilities. I inherited tanning, beautiful browning. I inherited long, wavy, dark brown, black hair. I inherited mysticism and vigilosity. I inherited a fighting spirit and voice, patient, loyal, multi-faith based, so imbued. I inherited a core generational truth tested by each shade of my ancestors, by continental drift and genetic hue. Because my ancestors spoke several languages, not just one, not just English. So I don't mention language at all. And so those other factors that I mentioned, I'm sure will come into your study. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
Diane, we'll be sending you the link.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, I love, yeah. No, language was so appealing to me because I knew that it was only a factor that is combined with so many other things. Yeah, that resonates with me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Next up, Ravi.
I have a few poems on language and identity, as well as a few articles, which is unavoidable having born in India, teaching a language to which you are not born, but the only language in which you are really literate. And the politics of belonging and the politics of power, which seamlessly come with the acquisition of an economically and imperially powerful language. But then I chose to do something very different. I chose to express in this poem a certain disquiet I've always felt wielding a language that comes to you not because you want to practice it, but because it's always thrust upon you. Here is the poem, Autochthonous. They quarreled over my name. They wished conflicting prospectors on one who was as yet not theirs. Each would have me toe a line which they with great care drew, so straight. Would I speak her tongue, or would I be wedded to his, already a compulsion? Lost as they were in the valley, they never discerned a route up the higher reaches of the steep face. They with much love, or was it the affliction of jealous ownership, ordered my kit with stuff that forever a burden lay at the bottom of my backpack. I had no use for a heavy language that stuck out like fanny workman's eyesights. I hungered for words that were crafted well, like a pencil, which would arrest my fall on steep and treacherous ascensions. No more for me the heavy Macintosh of your tongue that does not breathe. I shall instead look for all-weather Gore-Tex, which I can don or discard with ease and carry. Let me choose the shoes I wish to walk in. I need words that would cling to surfaces, dig into soft soil, or kick into hard ice. I shall be my own guide to the loftier heights, working my salvation with care and craft, like a diligent Sherpa on the 8,000ers. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Ah, so cool. There's so many things to write about. The transition into this sort of ownership and to this idea of choice versus compulsion, and language, something that is formed by external factors or by genetics, but ultimately is something that is an instrument of our free will. It's very cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Cay. Clive Roseman.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so it's a bit different for me, although I do slip into sort of me mode occasionally during the poem. It hasn't really got a title. I only wrote this morning, so it hasn't got a title. So I always admire people who can speak many languages. As a sports fan in England, it is noticeable that many overseas stars speak better English than the English players do. Yet the arrogant attitude of so many English is that we don't need to learn their language, even if we go to their country. I used to know someone who went to a football match, went on holiday in Spain, and complained that the match programme and the stadium announcements were in Spanish. But then he was a bit of a dick. The type who would think that a Spanish person was thick because they couldn't understand him. And repeato the words very slowly in a very loud voice to make them comprehendo. But for such a small country, we have a large number of regional accents. Drive a few miles up the road from virtually any given point and people will speak differently. And with England still being such a class-ridden shithole of a place, people with a strong regional accent are less likely to get a job that they are better able to do than the person who had their accent suppressed at an expensive private school paid for by a rich mummy and daddy. I'm from Birmingham, and despite being forced by circumstances to move away, I love my city, a vibrant, friendly, multicultural place. But the accent is derided and consistently voted one of the worst in the country by people with nothing better to do than put people down. People who talk like they have a plum in their mouth, or who talks like this and thinks they sounds better like that. I expect the bastards, or I half expect the bastards, to speak to me very slowly in a loud voice. People tell me I have lost the edge off my accent, as if that's something to be proud of. It isn't, not to me. I'm a Brummie and proud, and always will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. That's so cool to hear as someone who is an American. And something I was thinking about when I was forming this project was about some of those regional British accents, or even I was thinking about Scottish English, and I was like, if an American heard that, they would, whatever opinions they had about it, they would know that that was a native English speaker, right? Compared to what I've been thinking about in Singapore English speakers, even though there are natives for first language speakers of Singapore English, like those are very different assumptions that are made. But yeah, so many things that we've all of us have encountered, this sort of mocking or in this sort of regionalism and also all that stuff. It's very cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you, Cay.
Thank you.
Now I think it's time to hear something from Soy Avocado.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I should go with the inheritance prompt that was today's Simple Rimo or with a Singlish poem. So you choose.
Go both lah.
Can ah?
Can
Got
ah?
enough time? Oh, 有時間哈? Okay.
Can ah?
Okay. Then I'll do the serious one first. Death is a dictator. Our only inheritance is death. It is a certainty. Thanks to ancestry, death has a one-on-one appointment with each one of us. Death decides on the place and time, as death and discussion never meet. From the beginning of each birthing process, through labor pains and pangs, death starts to take root, shape and form uncertain. But the inheritance death hands out is a given, often taking its toll on loved ones left behind. In ancient days, inheritance was manuscripted as a last will and testament on parchment, but now photocopy paper suffices. Death is a dictator and is less welcome than change. So consider if any change can challenge, defy, defeat death. This is the inheritance prompt from Simple Rimo. And then there's also the other Singlish, the Singlish poem is also from the Simple Ramo prompt. We were told to try to write in Singlish. So here goes: shopping for school. Sure or not, he like that also can meh? He's just pet. Mana other problem. But he got smoke in toilet. Ponteng school. Ayah, Miss Lee, he's like that, not fair one. You blur sotong, how come you don't know ah? I don't like his camp face, I buay song. You so poor thing. Let mommy sayang you. Let's go Shopee and Alibaba now. I want like army Alibaba bag. Can put all my things inside, don't play. It's like my bolster. It can protect me. Can swing it at him or hide behind it. Then I shall open sesame loud. Ah Ting and Ah Tong sure will come help me. Take him go to his office for Singlish test. He sure get duck's egg. He's a banana, born here, but his Singlish CMI. Alamak, the shopping cart timed out liao. Okay, so I've had English version, a regular English version to this poem. So here goes: shopping for school. Are you sure he got away with that? Yes, he's teacher's pet. It's not a problem for him. He won't get into trouble. But he smoked in the school toilet, played truant. Well, Miss Lee has the propensity to be partial and biased. How can you not know? I don't like his face. It seems to beg for a slap across it. It just irks and totally irritates me. Oh, you poor thing. You so deserve tender loving care. Let mommy take care of you. Let's go for retail therapy and do some online shopping now. I want to buy the army-style big duffel bag. I can put so many things in it. It is seriously capacious. It's like my bolster. It can help and shield me. I can swing it at him or hide behind it. Then I'll shout, open sesame loudly. Ah Ting and Ah Tong will surely help me. Take him to the principal's office for a Singlish test. He will surely score a big fat zero, for he's of Chinese descent, but only speaks English. Born here in Singapore, but the standard of his Singlish is very low. Oh no, the online shopping cart has already timed out. Okay, this was meant to be serious too, but I don't know why it turned out this way. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Wow, it's an interesting. I wonder what that practice is like of translating from Singlish into English or whatever. Is that something difficult? Does it come easy? I don't know.
I think it's easy because it means the same thing to me in both versions. Yes.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I love the first poem too about death and about change. As I think as I sort of touched briefly on my journey towards this stuff, and personally a lot of things I was thinking about was about how there is no requirement for life except for death, and so then you have to make decide what you want to spend your time on. And I think change is something that is inevitable but also malleable. So I think that's very cool. It reminds me also, I read the Octavia E. Butler book recently, The Parable of the Sower, and she sort of forms a religion around change, and about how her God is sort of change, and that it is not, the idea that it is inevitable but malleable, and we're able to influence it and guide it towards something better. Thank you.
In response to Soy, I'm also going to do my Singlish poem about inheritance. So I coupled both of them together. America got Dear Abby. We got Capo Auntie. Our inheritance is about leftovers, just like fried rice. Do you want to hear something so funny? We got some people who actually cook rice to make fried rice one. That one's for mommy. Do you want to hear something so funny? Cheesy na, so crazy, right? Fried rice is supposed to be champo champo. Mix vegetables, meat, and all the hard rice from last night, re-wet with a bit of stock. Make a hole in the middle of your wok. Crack the egg inside. Fry on high heat so you can get wok hei, pang xia. Back to the thing about inheritance. Live your best life. Do what you want. Blow all the money if you can. Got leftovers? Then pass down and let the child relatives throw themselves in the wok. Hey, take my advice. Remind them to turn the fire off while they're fighting, or else they scarcely burn the house down. Kapwa nak pai. Don't malu me like that. Don't burn up the inheritance and destroy the legacy. From Kepo Auntie, better than Yaya Lady Whistledown from Bridgerton.
Thank you, Mom. So cool. Yeah. Fried rice and money, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, fried rice and money, correct. All right. I think I want to hear from Neil Daswani and then Justin.
Okay, I'm going to read out the poem that Justin referred to in the chat. I published it a little while ago. So it is based on my interpretation of an encounter that happened in the mid to late 18th century in the court of the Maratha, which is in the west of India. That's where they had their stronghold. So the Maratha ruler of the day had this very witty and clever courtier called Nana Fadnavis, and he was renowned throughout that regime and indeed most of India for his wit. There are several stories about that. Anyway, so this poem is titled Nana Fadnavis, and that's the name of the courtier. So Nana Fadnavis meets the polyglot. So it's a dialogue. Can you guess my mother tongue, said he. So this is the polyglot. Can you guess my mother tongue, said he, confident, cocky, young, the polyglot who was holding forth as he took on the Peshwa's court. Languages he had aplenty, claiming fluency in 20. High-flown Bengali he spoke with skill, a master of Punjabi and Tamil. The courtiers looked to Fadnavis. The Nana seemed quite ill at ease. The braggart continued to deceive. Wily Nana had an ace up his sleeve. Over dinner, the linguists began to boast. Do what you will, try your utmost, but you will never guess my mother tongue. The night went on, hapless hands were wrung. Well fed and gloating, the polyglot went to bed. Dreaming of his victory, he soon began to snore. Over the boaster's body and bloated head, a bucket of icy water did the good Nana pour. Suche, yelled he, who with Fadnavis had sparred. Nana said, aha, Gujarati is your mother tongue, the language you default to when caught off guard. Silenced by the crafty Nana, the polyglot bit his tongue. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Oh, it evokes the idea of so many people I've known. These polyglots. Yeah. I don't know if anybody here watches TikToks or anything, but there's all these like videos of these usually white people going around and bragging about their many languages that they have. But yeah, you can't deny your mother tongue, right? Yeah.
Such as it is.
Yeah.
More than I prefer being a polyglot is to be a polyglot so I can eat everything in the world.
Like a polypot.
Oh, no.
I have a question for you Singaporeans, apropos of not much else. Just apparently that was when I was marking essays and stories with the Singaporean English GCEs, this expression tight slap kept on popping up. And I've never seen it anywhere except in the Singaporean Singapore English papers, not in any of the other kind of Cambridge International papers like Indonesia. So is that an expression? Tight slap?
Again, it's an expression that's commonly used in our convent schools. A teacher from kindergarten up till primary and middle school, teachers normally warn their students saying that I'll give you a tight slap. It's a very common expression in India.
Yeah,
in convent schools.
I saw it in was when someone was described. It was almost like a kind of a film noir kind of scenario, and he walked over and he gave her a tight slap, and I just wondered if it was like that kind of a tight slap, or it was like a kind of stylized sort of slap, you know, like for film acting. But I thought. It was, and it kept on. It was one of those things. Just kept on cropping up from one paper to another. Oh, is that the weird people, these Singaporeans, going around giving each other tight slaps? You know, really.
I think in this case, Ian, it actually comes from the Indian English. To be honest, the etymology of that is stems from a slap in the face. So the whole humiliation around, I will give you a tight slap, meaning I will slap your face. And that all the humiliation associated with that. So I'll give the native Singaporeans here a little bit of reprieve. They're not guilty or responsible for that one.
I have something to say to retort.
I love this discussion. Yes. Okay, fight.
Okay, so we fight. Okay, so Justin, my Chinese is not very good, so you need to help me out here. So it's also got this Chinese term that says 一巴掌. It's like one, you know, it's like one slap. The zhang is like, you know, when you clap your hands, it's the same word in Chinese, and the character below it has got the word hand in it as well. So the zhang has got the.
That makes sense. Yeah, I wondered if it was something to do with like some kind of like a kind of an onomatopoeic or a visual kind of image. Certainly like stylized sort of things.
I don't think it's very stylized. I think it's just a very quick action out of anger. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Probably a bit more stinging than a sloppy slap.
Yes, that's right. Yes, a stinging slap. Yes.
Good. I'm glad I cleared that up. It's been bugging me for about the last 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
Not really, but it was just cropped up.
Linguistic problems and games, right? Justin, did you want to say something about it?
I've never heard the term a sloppy slap except from Iron Man. Yeah. There's like sloppy joes or the burger thing. Yeah.
I was making up the sloppy slap, Justin. We were sick of it. We'll just stick with the tight slap for now.
Choose your own corporeal punishment. Corporal punishment. Tight slap or sloppy slap? Which one? You check this box or check just the other box? Justin, your turn.
Okay. If I might say, Kay, let me see what I have. I can see your resemblance to your mom. Yeah. And like, Michael Canister said, mine is a very customized poem. It's like what's in the name poem. So the name embodies all the hope and dreams and aspirations that a mom has for her child, whether fulfilled or unfulfilled in her lifetime. So sharing screen. Here. Can you see? Okay. Our Language Minority by Cay Bappe. Cay is a low island situated on a coral reef platform. It comes from Spanish Antonio Cayo. Think of toothy smile, so warm. In English, Cay is pronounced key, formed by windswept coral debris. And the Cayman Island comprises of 3 islands, part of UK. It does not impose taxation or income earned in any way. found in the Caribbean Sea, you're thinking pirates. Ah, but not. The population comprised of pirates, shipwrecked sailors, and Oliver Cromwell's army from Jamaica. The Cay was written in only 3 weeks for young adult cubs. About 1942 ship torpedoed by a German sub. Blinded Charles Phillips survived with help of Timothy and still-fed Cat on a small Robinson Crusoe esque outlet. And so I end with a joke. What's the difference between an alligator, a caiman, and a crocodilia? The alligator sees you later, and the crocodile in a while. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so good.
So
Oh, wow.
cute.
What an honor. I feel so flattered. A poem with my name all throughout. That's so fun. Wow. Did you talk about see you later, alligator, in this group?
No, actually, I've never presented See You Later, Alligator.
What a coincidence. That's such a big part of my childhood, I think.
Cay, I want to invite
rock and
wait,
roll
wait.
in the 50s. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ian.
So that expression is like from a rock and roll song, wasn't it? See you later, alligator, wild crocodile. I can't remember who did it first. Really like not Elvis.
Elton John, probably.
No. It was like from the no, not Elton John, Neil. Come on.
That's Crocodile Rock. I was just being.
Cay, this whole show came about because of your prompt. This is the time that you get to respond and speak to the community who gave you a rose for your prompt.
Wow. I don't even know what to say. It's so what a wonderful thing to be a part of. I feel so honored, and like I mentioned at the first response, I feel almost unworthy to be responding to all of your wonderful things that you're sharing, these deeply personal or very charming like these pieces of work that are really beautiful. And it's so, I think it's a very special thing as a researcher to have my little research project being inspiring so many cool things. I'm glad you guys liked the prompt. I loved your responses. I hope I heard you well. I listened, and I'll take a lot of this with me as I continue with this project. Thank you very much.
All the best for your research, Cay.
Thank you.
So please, Cay still needs more responses in order to fulfill her research. So as you have heard what my father, TK, said, if you don't mind completing the form and survey, but also if you feel comfortable, share that survey with others so that their voices can be heard and be represented. So that's my appeal to each one of you. And Cay, I want to thank you for this very, very precious time. I'm going to try to share. Tommaso says, good luck with your thesis. I'm going to share See You Later, Alligator, if I can find it. You know what? Cay, talk to the group for a while. I'm giving you hosts and community talk to Cay. I'm going to actually get the book.
Oh my goodness. This is so exciting. I'm now realizing there's a chat here. I don't know why I didn't see this. So cool.
Well, you have to save it so that you can go back and look at the video since it's recorded, and save the chat so you can go back and read the chat, because there's some really great comments in there. So you have all of that you can look at again. Okay, Cay?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So See You Later, Alligator was I first came across the text when I went to visit my son's special ed preschool. And his special ed teacher had this rattly rat book that had no illustrations that she would share with her preschoolers. And this book I produced this book because I'm an artist and I wanted to respond and, share a gift with my son's teacher. And when she got the copy and she was reading, one day she heard a voice that she never heard before. And that was a 3-year-old girl living with autism. And her voice was heard for the first time as she read this book. See you later, alligator. And this will be my sign off for today as well. Dedicated to all the Sophies in this world. Okay, do you remember the actions? Okay. Oh, she's not gonna do it. So that's actions to every one of these, okay? So see you later, alligator. Bye-bye, butterfly. You can tell I haven't turned these pages in a long time. Give a hug, ladybug. Be sweet, parakeet. Blow a kiss, jellyfish. See you soon, raccoon. Take care, polar bear. Out the door, dinosaur. So long, King Kong. And bye, said the fly. Goodbye, goodbye. We've had a lot of fun. I'll miss you. I'll miss you. I'll miss you until next Tuesday. See you later, alligator. Next week, we'll have a video from Jennifer Ann, a Singapore Poetry Writing Month poet. She's a musician and all her poetry is a song. And she said she can't actually physically be with us because she's giving tuition, but what she's going to do is she's going to make a recording for us and we're going to record our responses to share with her. So next week, we'll have Jennifer Ann from Singapore. But I want to thank my beautiful Shook artist, whom I'm very proud of, for being a part of this community. And I've been talking to her about you all for a long time now. And with great pride, I have finally gotten to introduce both of you together. So thank you, Cay Bappe, for being a part of this Shook segment and for being here. All right, so community, I'll see you next Tuesday.